Greetings and salutations. This video is going to be the unvarnished truth about the Linux operating system. What you can expect if you are a current Windows or Mac user and you want to switch to Linux. That's the point here. I'm going to tell you how it really is. I have been posting Linux content on this channel for a long time. This channel's been around for more than 10 years, and we've been talking about Linux here in the Easy Linux project for at least 5 years now. And if you do something like this, and it is publicly available, and the public has a way to send feedback, some of that feedback is going to be negative, nasty, obscene. We all know that. However, there is one theme in the nasty, negative feedback that I am getting lately that disturbs me a little bit. And that is the number of people who accuse me of lying about Linux. And I don't just see it here, I see it elsewhere on other people's channels and other places where I consume content about Linux. So let's just get into it and talk about the truth for those of you who think that all of us Linux users, or those of us out here who are trying to bring more people to Linux, are lying about Linux. What's really going on? First, let's talk a little bit about what Easy Linux is all about. There is a lot of false information on the internet about Linux. The goal of the Easy Linux project is to provide useful information to help new users get started with Linux. While I have done a lot of research for my videos, they are mainly for entertainment value, not definitive guides or the absolute authority on anything. I have made it clear that those who follow my videos on their own equipment do so at their own risk. There's no guarantee that every procedure will work on every combination of hardware out there. No one is perfect or gets everything right all the time. That includes me. Linux is not for everyone. You'll have to decide whether Linux is for you or not, and I hope this video helps you to do just that. First of all, the question that you have to ask yourself is, do you really want to learn Linux? Linux is not like Windows. Linux is not a drop-in replacement for Windows, and those who expect Linux to be like Windows get very frustrated. I get that all the time from people who attempt to get started with Linux, and then they get very frustrated because they find they actually have to learn something, that this is not what they expected and it doesn't work the way they think it ought to. Those who are willing to take the time to learn and are open to new ideas do well with Linux. If you look at it as an adventure, then you're going to do really well with it. If you try and jump into it too quickly, or if you expect too much too soon, you're going to get very frustrated. Keep that in mind. Why won't Linux work with all hardware? Linux will work on many x86-based computers built in the last 10 years, but not all. Some hardware manufacturers do not support Linux, or if they do, it's not supported well, and that is on the hardware manufacturer. Most of the computers that are available out there, whether they be laptops or desktops, were designed to run Windows. And of course, you can run Linux on Mac hardware, but that actually is a bit more difficult sometimes than trying to get it run on a Windows machine. So most of this hardware that's available on the shelf at your local big box store on sale has been designed to run the Windows operating system. They weren't thinking about Linux. So before you run out and dump a bunch of money into a machine and then bring it home and try and install Linux on it and then sit there and scratch your head why it doesn't work, you need to do research. It is up to the user to research whether their machine will work with Linux. That is all available on the internet. If you are thinking about buying a certain computer, whether it's loaded with Windows 10 or Mac or whatever, you can do research on it to see if other people have installed Linux on it and what kind of a time they've had with that. And that can be a really good indication of whether your machine is going to work. All you have to do is do a Google search, install Linux on name of machine, and then see what pops up. Linux either works with your hardware or it does not. There's really no in between. there is little that can be done to make it work if the support is not there from the OEM. In some cases, people are complaining that they've downloaded a driver that they had to build from source, and they don't know whether they did it right, and they rebooted the machine and it didn't work, or they rebooted the machine and then the machine would not boot because of their driver build setup, whatever the deal is. Really, honestly, if your hardware is well supported, then the driver will already be in the kernel, so you won't have to do anything to get it to work, or there will be a proprietary driver available in the repositories, and that's assuming that you're running something like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, or Manjaro, something that is made to be easy to use for new users. It's either going to be there or it isn't, and if it isn't, well, that's the way it is a lot of the times. In the U.S., let's not skip. This is a very important point here. The only way to absolutely ensure that Linux will be 100% compatible with your hardware is to buy a computer that is made to run Linux. That is a machine that is specifically designed with the idea of running Linux on it in mind. In the U.S., Dell, System 76, and Purism all sell machines that are built specifically to run Linux. If you are a complete total novice to Linux and you want a fresh start, this is a good way to get started. These machines come at a premium cost. That is absolutely true. But if you are a novice user, this is somebody who doesn't know how to tweak and get things to work, this may be the best way for you to get started with Linux, honestly. Now, if you are the kind of user that already understands how hardware works and you know how to do this research and you need to look things up, probably you wouldn't have to spend the money on that kind of hardware. You could get Linux to run on pretty much anything, and God bless you for being able to do so. But not everybody coming to Linux has your savvy. Keep that in mind as we roll along here. This is aimed at people who are just starting out with Linux. A lot of the times, the best way to get started with Linux is to get a used machine that's a couple of years old, that you're not going to dump a whole lot of money into, install Linux on it. Hopefully it will run well enough for you to get a feeling about the system. Take the time to learn how to use it, and then when you get more comfortable with it, if you want to make Linux your central operating system, you want to move away from Windows and Mac, and you want to use Linux all the time, then you can do some research and figure out exactly what hardware you need to do what you need to get done. But most of the time, a little used laptop that's a couple of years old will actually work quite well to learn your way around Linux. Just do your research first. That's important. Will my Windows applications work with Linux? This is a question that I get answered all the time. There are ways to run native Windows applications on Linux using emulators like Wine, but not every app works, and those that do run sometimes don't run very well. Therefore, it is best to seek alternative, that's a good word, native Linux applications than to focus on trying to make old Windows applications run on Linux. I get this all the time. People say, well, I need to run thus and such 2.6 and this will do that 2.7 or I'm not going to be able to use Linux. Well, the answer is most likely you're not going to be able to use Linux. What you need to do is get out of the mindset of I absolutely have to use this application that I paid for 5 years ago and I've been limping it along on Windows all this time to get this particular task done. There are alternatives available that are native to Linux that will do exactly the same thing and may even do it better than what you already have. And all you have to do is do the research to figure out what is the best way to get that done. People who use Linux full-time do everything that people who run Windows or Mac do. They just do it a little bit differently. Take some time to figure out how to do it. If you are absolutely positively in a situation where you have a piece of software that will not run on Linux and you absolutely cannot live without, then don't worry about Linux. Stick with Windows, because you're banging your head up against a wall if you expect it to run and act exactly the same way. But like I said, if you are open to the idea of finding alternative applications to get the same work done, then there's a lot for you to choose from on Linux. Some better than what you might be working with, some worse, but that's the way it is. Running internet-facing Windows applications on Linux through something like Wine or Crossover can open up the system to viruses and other malicious software. That is very true. People who have a Linux system and then have a bunch of internet-facing games and browsers and email clients running on Wine, they might as well be running Windows because they are presenting an attack surface for those who like to hack into Windows machines and get viruses on Windows machines to get into a Linux system. I've seen some people, which I think is crazy, who run so much Wine that they actually have some sort of Windows antivirus running on their Wine installation or something to keep that out. In that case, what's the point of running Linux? Might as well just have a Windows machine to do all that stuff with. That's my take on it. I think if you're going to go to Linux, you're going to be much more secure and safer, and you'll probably get much better performance if you are going to be doing things natively in Linux and running native Linux applications. It just takes time to learn what those are. What's so bad about dual booting Linux and Windows? Several years ago, I posted a video called The Dual Boot Deception, in which I discouraged novice users from attempting to set up dual boots because it gets them in trouble. That video has been hugely misunderstood by people who are not novice users, who actually understand how a dual boot works. They understand about partitions. They understand about bootloaders. If you are one of those people that knows how a dual boot works and you know how to set one up and you are willing to take the risk, then go ahead. Be my guest. However, novice users who attempt to set up dual boot often trash the system and then have no clue how to fix it. They most often don't even know enough about what is going on to ask coherent questions when they are seeking help. Now, I have had that happen myself. Somebody said, I tried to set up a dual boot with Windows 10 and now my machine will not boot. I can offer them absolutely no help whatsoever other than to reload Windows or reload Linux and start over from scratch. There's nothing that can be done about that. There's no trick. You can't uninstall it. And without sitting in front of the machine, even if you are an expert on both Windows and Linux and how their bootloaders work, that you can't fix it. I mean, maybe if you are sitting right in front of the machine, you might be able to salvage it, but you can't help somebody like that through email. It's impossible. Anytime you modify a bootloader or repartition a hard drive, there is a risk of making the machine unbootable or losing all your data. That is why, if you don't understand how that works, if you don't understand what you're doing, my advice is to stay away from it. Don't do it. Dual boots should be done by experienced users who understand the risks. Many Linux installers, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Manjaro included, all of these, have a one-click option that will try and set up a dual boot on your system. Many people who have tried to do this way have ended up bricking their machine, which means that it will not boot Windows and it will not boot Linux, and now they have no clue what to do. They then blame Linux, when in fact it was their lack of understanding what the hell was going on that caused the problem. They didn't understand what they were doing. They just saw that option and thought, wow, I can have my cake and eat it too. I can keep my Windows and I can use Linux. Unfortunately, because the developers have made that so easy to do, they have actually sent a lot of people away from Linux, because if you're a complete noob and you don't understand what's going on and you end up with a brick machine, you may end up having to take it to a shop somewhere to have some guy reload it, and he's going to tell you, well, you shouldn't have messed with it, Linux is awful, don't ever touch it again. And then those people are going to go out into the community and they're going to say that. That's the point about the video that I posted earlier. And that's why I still to this day do not recommend dual boots, nor do I support them. If somebody sends me a message and says, can you help me with a dual boot? I usually say no, because it's very complicated and there's a lot of variables in there. So there you go. Do I really have to learn the terminal to use Linux? This is another one that I get over and over again, and people say the terminal is archaic and we shouldn't have to do this in 2018, and those people are showing their ignorance when they say that, simply because of the fact that they don't understand what they're looking at when they look at a terminal. It is not DOS. It's not DOS-like. It is a completely different language. Most Linux distributions ship with something called Bash, which is the born-again shell. And it is a command line interpreter plus a programming language that is all in one place. And Bash is awesome, and it's powerful, and it's wonderful, and the more you learn about it, the more you will love it. However, if you don't want to learn about the terminal, that's fine. Many modern distributions are all point and click and easy to set up without opening a terminal. Linux Mint is one of those. Ubuntu Mate is another. Manjaro and MX Linux are all good examples. They don't need any time in a terminal to set up, get drivers installed, usually nothing like that. Just turn it on, let it go. As long as all of your hardware is going to be supported, you should be able to set that up. As a matter of fact, Ubuntu Mate, or some people see that mate, it's actually named after a drink in South America, which is mata, but it's kind of been bastardized by the developers into being called Mate. That particular distribution has a wonderful welcome screen that comes up and takes you through the entire process of setting up the system. And so does Linux Mint these days. So yeah, you can do it without having to get in a terminal. It is best for new users to at least have a little knowledge of the terminal, how to navigate mainly, because most of the help they will receive will, the first thing they're going to be instructed to do is go to a terminal. And that is because if I'm trying to help you and I understand the ins and outs of the system, it is a lot easier for me to give you some very specific commands to put in a terminal to change something than it is for me to try and explain to you, either in a blog post or through an email, go here, open this, click that, go to box number 3. You see, it gets very, very crazy. So if I know a way that I can say, okay, run this command one after the other in a terminal, and that will fix your problem, that's how I'm going to do it. And that's how most help on the internet is given for the Linux operating system. And that's simply because of the fact that the people who are helping you know the system inside and out, and they're very familiar with the terminal, and it's a lot easier to give help that way. Also, as I said earlier, Bash is a universal way of interacting with computers. It's awesome. It doesn't matter what operating system or type of computer. Everything from a little embedded device all the way up to the world's biggest supercomputers. If they're running Bash, you can talk to it. You can interact with that machine. You can figure out what's going on. You can administer that machine. Learning how to use it is a very valuable skill. If you wanted to go into IT, if Linux is part of your learning because you want to go out there and make money working with computers, learn Bash. It's a very valuable skill. Is Linux really as stable and safe as people say? The answer is absolutely yes, it is. Don't listen to anybody who will tell you that Linux is unstable or Linux is unreliable, because that's not true. Linux, correctly administered and run by somebody who understands how the system works, will just go on forever. I have Linux machines that have been running with nothing but updates for 4 and 5 years that have never crashed. I've never had a problem with them. When the new version of something comes along, I will upgrade them in place, and they just keep going. No, you do not need antivirus software on your Linux desktop. Really. I don't care what anybody says. Ignore them. They do not know what they're talking about. The Linux desktop system as we have it today is extremely secure. While I can't say that there's absolutely no chance whatsoever of you getting a virus or you getting some software on your machine that is malicious, the chances of it actually happening are very slim. I mean, it is possible that a meteorite will come streaking out of the sky right now and hit you in the head. Is it going to happen? Nah, I wouldn't worry too much about it. That's about as safe as the average Linux desktop is. A lot of the faults that you hear about in Linux are people talking about servers and embedded devices. And many of the times when you hear about these major problems, the patch to fix it is already out by the time you hear it. And the people who attack Linux systems are usually attacking servers on the internet. Most of the internet is running on Linux, and those servers are constantly being banged on by people who want to get in there and do damage or get to databases and things like that. Your average desktop system running on a home network is not being banged on that way. People are not coming after you. You do not have things like SSH up and running, usually publicly on the internet, that attackers can come after on a home Linux system. And if you set up a simple firewall, you're almost, you're just untouchable almost. Now, those who try to do too much with Linux too soon very often brick their machines. So that's one of the things that people start out with, and they get really excited about Linux, and they try all kinds of different stuff, and they do things that they don't really understand, and what they end up doing is breaking their system where it doesn't work. This is called borking or bricking your machine. I put bork in here, but I said brick. Either way, it doesn't matter. That's a rite of passage. We have all done it. Everybody who has learned Linux at one point or another has put in the wrong combination of commands or clicked the wrong thing, and all of a sudden we have destroyed our system. It just goes along with Linux. Linux assumes that you know what you want to do. And if you do not respect that fact and you put the wrong things in, or if you do things that you don't really understand, you can end up in that situation. However, if you just point and click and follow along and play the rules and don't mess around with the system too much, it'll run forever. It's absolutely amazing. Now, to keep your system as safe as I was talking about earlier, you must install all of the updates for your system to ensure that it is safe. That's how Linux stays safe, is the constant updates. When a threat is found, it's immediately patched. So therefore, you should always update all of your online systems whenever the updates come in. At least once a week. Everything needs to be up to date. It's just something to keep in mind. Well, why do they give Linux away for free? I put in fro free, but you guys know what I meant. There must be a catch. Linux is just part of the free software movement that started in the 1980s. And the basic idea or philosophy behind the free software movement is that advanced computer software will be available to anyone who wants to take the time to learn how to use it with no strings attached. Now, sometimes that means that it's free, as in no cost, no charge. Many Linux distributions, as a matter of fact, most Linux distributions, you just download, install, and start using it. That's all there is to it. That's true of Linux Mint. It's true of Ubuntu. It's true of MX Linux. It's true of Manjaro. All of the big popular ones. Now, these projects may ask for your donations because they are non-profit, but you don't necessarily have to pay anything to start using Linux, and that's very cool. But when they talk about freedom, as in the free software movement, then they're really talking about free as in freedom and not necessarily free as in free beer. So yes, there can be free and open software out there that you pay for, but you're paying for the packaging and distribution of the software. You're not paying for something that is has code that's being kept away from you. And you also hear the term open source when we talk about free software. And what that means is that you have a piece of software where somewhere posted is the actual source code that the program is compiled from. And you can go read that source code. You can see exactly what that program's doing if you know how to read source code. And if you know how to program and you can read the source code, then you can modify the program to do what you want it to do. That's another part of free software. It's one of the reasons that it keeps the free software community that we have very safe software. It's because people are constantly looking at this code, and anybody who tries to slip something nefarious in, they're going to get busted, and it's going to scream bloody murder in the community, and you're going to hear about it, and that program's going to go away. It does happen once in a great while, but it's very seldom that it does. So that is what that is all about. Because you'll also hear the term open source, which simply means free software that you can go look at the source code. Most support for free software is community-based. Any community, as it is in the world at large, will have some unpleasant people that you may have to deal with. Ignore them and move on to someone who genuinely wants to help. We're out here. You have to take the time to find us. And the last thing about this that I want to put out here is that Linux is not a product. People tend to think of it as a product like Windows and Mac is, something that they paid for. It's a community of developers and users who work for a common goal. Be a part of the community and contribute when you can. The more who do, the better Linux will be. But also keep in mind that you can't walk into this community and then walk around going, this sucks, it doesn't work. I don't understand. People have an attitude like, we're all used to this idea of being able to bitch at the man. Microsoft, Windows sucks, but how do I fix this? When you come into the Linux world and you do that, you're usually talking directly to the person who wrote the program and who is maintaining it. It is not a monolithic corporation, and people do not respond well to being told that what they're working on sucks or doesn't work or this is stupid. You need to have a little bit of a different attitude. Come with your hat in your hand, come with a positive attitude. You'd be surprised. I have had developers completely rewrite things simply because I said, hey, why doesn't this do this, or how can I make this work better? It's happened to me more than one occasion. I've mentioned it in one of these videos, and the next thing I know, the developer posts a patch, and it's fixed. And it all has to do with attitude. Positive attitude will get you very far in the Linux community. And you must ignore the ones who have the negative attitude. And I guess the last question is, why are some people hostile towards Linux? Some who have had bad experiences with Linux in the past are bitter toward the community. They blame Linux for their own shortcomings in most cases, and that's absolutely true. They jumped in too quickly. They didn't know what they were getting into. They were nasty to people in the community, and they got nasty handed back to them. And they say that everybody in this community is a bunch of jerks, and the stuff doesn't work and all that stuff. And they go around and spread that around, when in the truth of the matter is that they themselves are the one who approached Linux too quickly, didn't understand what they were getting into. That happens over and over and over and over again. Some people come back and change their attitudes, and some people don't. And there are people out there who are quote-unquote tech people who have had that experience because they jumped in and didn't know who they were talking to and didn't know what it was all about. And now they go around and say, well, Linux sucks, man. I don't want to use that. And they're the ones who are missing out. Some entrenched users of proprietary systems feel threatened by Linux, especially those who have careers that depend on those systems. Absolutely. That is an issue, especially with people who work for, the parasite companies, like people who write antivirus. It is a threat to them because Linux generally doesn't need it, doesn't want it. No, thank you. We don't have to have it. Most antivirus for Linux is designed to scan for Windows viruses and malware, because there's really not that much in Linux. And so these people are very threatened by the existence of Linux, because if Linux takes over the marketplace, they're going to be out of a job. And if Microsoft ever closes up all the holes that exist in the Windows system that cause it to be such a virus fest to begin with, if they ever did that, then they would put those people out of business as well. Some of the nastiest stuff that I have ever seen has come from people who work for these companies that put out this parasitic software. Some people feel like you are attacking their choices when you try and tell them about something new. If you say, hey, that's not such a great thing, but this is, they're going to get all upset, and they're going to get all butthurt because they went out and spent a bunch of money on a computer, and now you're saying that's not the best hardware for what they want to do, or something like that. I ran into that on a video that I posted a year or so ago called Top 5 Mistakes That New Users Make. And one of the offhand remarks I made is that Linux doesn't work well with AMD, and it doesn't. And when you're talking about older computers, we're talking about computers that are 10 to 15 years old. Some of those cards that AMD put out were horrid. And many people took exception to that. Like, oh my God, how dare you say that AMD is not the best choice for Linux? It's not, folks. There's always been problems with drivers for AMD. Well, there's problems with NVIDIA and Intel as well, but older AMD especially. I'm talking about old AMD. Not necessarily what's going on now. I'm given to understand it's much better. However, I personally would never intentionally buy a machine that had any AMD hardware in it. If somebody gave me one and it had AMD and it happened to work, that would be okay. But I wouldn't go out and buy it. So that's the way I feel about AMD. Many people only see things from their own point of view and can't believe that someone else may want to do things differently or have a different outcome than themselves. Now, this should be than themselves, but it is than themselves. Basically, what that's saying is a lot of people are very myopic in their view of the world, and if they sit down in front of their machine and they try and do what they need to do in their use case scenario, and it doesn't work for them, then it won't work for anybody. In other words, if it breaks for them, then it's bad, and it'll never work for anyone. Part of the basic Unix Linux philosophy is that there's more than one way to do everything, and no one way is absolutely correct. There are ways that are better than others, but part of the deal is that it's your computer and you can do with it what you want. And you need to have respect for people that want to do it a different way. And a lot of people inside the Linux community don't have that. That's not people from outside. That's people from inside who say, well, I can't believe you're running this distribution, or I can't believe that you're running this piece of hardware, or why are you trying to do this with that? Very non-productive, counterproductive attitude to have, and it's unfortunate. And of course, some people are just plain nasty. Just flat out, there are nasty people. In any community, anywhere in the world, there's one or two in every crowd. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. There's always one or two that are just plain nasty. And the main thing to take away from this is the fact that you should ignore all of the above if you want to do well with Linux. You have to seek out people who are positive and willing to help you, and you shouldn't let people who try and shame you or try and bully you into using what they want you to use or not use what they don't want you to use. You shouldn't allow that. This is about you. It's about your own personal journey, and it's about finding out what you want to do. And Linux gives you, if it gives you anything, it gives you choices. There's always so many different choices in Linux. And that's one of the beautiful things about working in the Linux biosphere, is the fact that there's 10,000 ways to do everything. As always, thank you for watching this video. Your feedback is always welcome. Please join the discussion at Easy Talk. You can check that out at easylinux.com. Be sure to give Easy Linux a like on Facebook if you are a Facebook user. Check out freedompenguin.com for more about Linux. There's always something cool to read about or watch at freedompenguin.com. And I want to say thank you to everybody who has subscribed to this channel in the year 2018. This has been a monster year for Easy Linux, and I am very appreciative, and I'm hoping that 2019 is going to be even cooler than 2018. I have decided that this year I'm going to probably post less videos, just simply because of the fact that I want to take a little bit more time for each video and make sure that they're really like, a big video that you guys will get some use out of. For a long time here, my attitude has been just to try and get something up weekly, and that's good, when you're growing your channel, to do that. But really what I want to do is I want to focus on putting up content that people find very useful for 2019. So it may be a little while between videos, but hang around. You know how it is, man. There's always something cool to talk about in Linux, and we will definitely be talking about it. So that is it. If I do not talk to you again, happy holidays and a happy new year to everyone. Be safe and have a good time.